Getting started with projects. We're going to dig a little deeper into projects here in this nugget, and we'll start with a quick refresher just to cover what projects are all about. What can they do for us? How do we create them? Where do we create them? That kind of thing. And then we'll get into permissions. We'll see how we can grant team members access to our projects and assign them a specific set of permissions through what are known as roles. We'll also talk a little bit about Cloud IAM. IAM stands for Identity Access Management, and it gives us a more granular way to control access down at the resource level within specific products here in Cloud Platform. We'll also cover service accounts, which is used for server-to-server interaction. It's essentially a way for us to give our code identity. We'll finish up with a look at some best practices for working with projects, and we'll also talk a little bit about using Google Apps. Let's get to it. So once again, projects are really just the top level container here in Cloud Platform. Almost anything you create, manage, or do is going to be done inside of the context of a project. So think of it as just a boundary. It's a boundary for things like usage, billing, permissions, credentials, and even services and APIs. Now, if you were wondering if you could create multiple projects underneath your account, the answer is yes. And you'll see towards the end of this nugget why that's actually going to be a best practice. When we do create a project, which, by the way, if you've been following along this course sequentially, we went through a lab, we created our CP100 project, you know that it was pretty straightforward. Really, all we need to do is supply it with a name. And that name is just simply an arbitrary label for us. It's not used by the Cloud Platform anywhere. It's just purely for us to make our project human readable. But there's also a project number. That number you have no control over. It's generated by the platform, used by the platform underneath the hood. But there's also one other one, a project ID. And this one you can generate on your own, or you can have it auto-generated, but it needs to be a unique identifier, unique across the entire Cloud Platform. This is the ID that we'll be passing in when working with things like SDKs and APIs and other external tools. It's also known as the application ID inside of App Engine. In fact, App Engine actually uses that app ID inside of the subdomain for the appspot.com URL. More on that when we talk about App Engine. Now, we have a number of ways to interact with projects. We have the web UI, otherwise known as the developer's console. And in fact, in a previous lab, that's what we used to create our very first project. We can also interact with projects programmatically using the Cloud Resource Manager API. Check out the APIs Explorer to see the kind of functionality that exposes. And then we can also use the gcloud command line utility. Although the functionality there is limited, we've got more functionality coming down the pipe. Let me show you how I know that. This is pretty cool. Let's head up here to the developer's console. All right, so here we are inside of our CP100 project that we created. And in order to create a project, we just used the web UI. We dropped this down. We chose create a project. We gave it a friendly name. Optionally, again, you can supply your own project ID if you don't like this auto-generated one here. Just remember, it has to be globally unique. And then again, everything you do when you create resources is done in the context of that project. You can drop down your little project info here. Here's the name, here's the ID, and here is that internal project number. Now watch this. Let's fire up Cloud Shell. This is why I love Cloud Shell, because it's always up to date and it's just awesome. Quick, easy way to do things. Let's do a gcloud projects with the H flag here to get some help. Here is what we can currently do through the gcloud utility. Just list and describe. So if we do a list, obviously it's just going to list a couple of projects that we have in here. My first project and our CP100 project. But if you do a gcloud alpha projects with the H flag here, check out what's coming down the pipe. Create. Yeah, we'll be able to create projects soon enough here when this gets out of alpha, goes through beta, and eventually gets into GA, generally available. But you can also do this with beta. So we could easily just change alpha here to beta to see what's coming in very soon. And we've got quite a bit of new functionality coming inside of here. We can work with things like IAM. We'll talk about that here shortly. We can do updates, and then obviously we can delete and do some other things in here as well. But this is why the SDK is awesome, or the Cloud Shell is awesome, because you don't have to keep that local SDK updated manually. Let's talk about project permissions. In order to collaborate with team members, we need to get them onto our projects so they can do things inside of them. And there's three major roles that we have here at the project level. We have viewer, editor, and owner. And these are concentric, meaning the higher levels automatically get all the permissions of the lower levels. And it's a very simple process. What you're going to do is take their email address from their Google account. It's either going to be their Google account, their Gmail account, or the Google Apps domain account. And then we're going to assign one of these roles to it, and it's going to send them an invitation. Once they accept that invitation, they will then be a part of the project with that set of permissions. So the role with the least amount of privileges here is the viewer role. They'll simply have read-only access to everything inside of our project. The editor role will be able to do a lot more than that, deploy apps, modify code, configure services, as well as everything that the viewer role can do. And then the owner role is the big one here. They can do pretty much everything. They can invite other members, they can remove members, they can even delete the project, and they can do everything that the editor and the viewer can do. We also have billing administrators. These are the folks that can manage billing, and they can add more billing administrators or remove billing administrators. And so this isn't really a part of the project, more just a part of the billing area of the project. But a thing to note is a project, yes, can indeed have multiple owners, editors, viewers, and billing administrators. And again, there'll be a best practice around having multiple owners that we'll talk about here at the end of the nugget. Now, let me take you over to the Cloud Console and show you a couple of things around permissions and how we can do this here inside of the Web UI. So here we are back in the Web UI. Let's hit the drop down and head down here to permissions. This is where you'll manage your project level permissions inside of the Web UI. It'll break it down by role here. So editor, we've got 3. These are all service accounts, by the way, that get added automatically when you create the project. And then we have 1 owner, which is of course our account when we created the project with, we got added in as an owner. If you want to add members, you click the little add members button here, type in the account. I'm going to use my cptnuggets.com account here, and then assign a role. If you do an editor or viewer role, it'll just add it in and they'll automatically have permission. If you give them the owner role, it's actually going to send an invitation via email, which they will need to click on the link and then accept the invitation, and then they'll become a part of the project. In fact, I just got the invitation. I'm going to switch monitors here and head over here. I'm going to accept the invitation. There it is. I hit accept. So now if I come back over here and refresh this page, we should see that I am now officially an owner on this project as well. And there it is. Now we have 2 owners, and there it is. My Nuggets account is now on this as an owner. So if I were to switch accounts here and log in under my cptnuggets.com account, I would have full access to everything just as the original owner of this project does, right? So there you go. That's how you can manage permissions here in the Web UI. Pretty easy to do. Oh, I should also show you where you can manage billing administrators. Again, hit the drop down, head down here to billing. And right on the overview page, you'll see it right here, administrators. You can just add their email addresses in here, and that will, again, give those individuals access to just the billing area here of your projects. Let's talk about Google Cloud IAM. IAM stands for Identity and Access Management, and it's giving us a consistent, standard, unified way to grant permissions at the resource level across all these products and services. Now, how it works is pretty straightforward. We've got resources out there. A resource could be a cloud platform project, a genomics data set, a pub subtopic, a compute engine virtual machine, so on and so forth, right? A cloud storage bucket. And right now, by the way, genomics, pub sub, and projects are all general availability inside of the Cloud IAM world. Compute engine, app engine, cloud storage, and cloud logging, all currently in alpha, so they'll be coming out soon. But essentially, we've got all those resources, right? And each resource has a policy associated with it. That policy is really just a collection of users and what roles they're bound to. And that's it. That's your policy. But the nice thing about IAM is now these specific products and specific resources within these products can expose more roles. For example, PubSub has a publisher subscriber role for the topic resource. So keep an eye out for more product support, more roles, more everything from Cloud IAM, because it'll make our lives easier when it comes to access management. Now, we can do this again through the Google Developers Console. We have IAM APIs, and yeah, we can even do it through the gcloud command line utility. In fact, let's head to the Developers Console and check it out. gcloud beta projects, get IAM policy, pass in our project, and this will show us our bindings. So here's our members for our editor role. Here's our members for our owner role. And now what we could also do, if I head over here to our second tab, just to show you here, just to show you the help on projects, here's our get IAM policy. We could actually send this to a JSON file, edit it, and then run set IAM policy, passing that file in, and it would update them all in one fell swoop. You can also do specific things like add a specific binding or remove a binding. So we can do all that stuff here through the command line, and you can also, of course, do it through the web UI, as you just saw us do it with permissions there at the project page. We could also do it for specific products. In fact, here, let me head down to PubSub here. Here's PubSub. And we've got a topic in here. If I check that and hit permissions, check it out. Now we can add members just as we did at the project page. We would add their email in here, select their role, and look, we get more granular roles down here at the product level. Here's our publisher and subscriber role for that topic. And again, you can also do all of this stuff through the API. There's also a test IAM policy through the API if you want to test out members and their access against specific resources. We also have the concept of service accounts. This is how we're going to accomplish server-to-server interactions. Just to give you an example, let's say that we've got a compute engine app that's running in the background all the time, generating a ton of data, and every now and then it needs to dump that data into a Google Cloud Storage bucket, or maybe stream it up into BigQuery. In either case, our code needs to authenticate with those APIs to do so. And if it's not running under the context of any user, which it wouldn't be because it's running in the background, then how would it make those calls? That's where service accounts come into play. We can generate a service account, and then we can attach that service account to those API calls, and now our code has identity. Now, whenever you create a project, you automatically get App Engine and Compute Engine service accounts set up for you by default. So you can use those when you're working with products and services inside of Google's cloud from one service to another. If you have an application running somewhere else externally, maybe in another cloud or maybe on-prem, you can create your own service account, generate public-private key pair, and then use that to authenticate with these APIs inside of Google's cloud. Moving on here, let's take a look at a couple of project best practices that will protect you against potentially ugly scenarios. The first one is additional owners. Make sure that you have more than one owner on your project. And the reason being, if an owner gets deleted, and you only have one owner on that project, that owner gets deleted, your project will get deleted as well. So that's why as soon as you make your projects, add an additional owner. Even if it's yourself with another email account, add an additional owner. It'll give you a little bit of peace of mind and redundancy there, knowing that that one owner isn't going to disappear and your project won't go with it. Also, as I mentioned earlier in this nugget, you can have multiple projects associated with your account. So take advantage of that. This will make it easier for you to manage all the stages of release pipeline, and you can have different permission structures for each one. So it gets rid of the whole too many hands in the cookie jar problem with one project. Just a couple of notes here on using Google Apps. It is very common to use Google Apps to manage accounts used with Google Cloud Platform. In fact, I'm a perfect example of this because our CBT Nuggets accounts are Google accounts. We've been a Google Apps domain forever. So the second bullet is why I'm a good example of this, because I have a ton of projects underneath my CBT Nuggets account, both for personal and work use. So this is why it is best to suspend owner accounts when no longer required rather than delete, because what happens if I'm the only owner on these projects and they delete my account, it's going to be gone forever, at the very least nearly impossible to recover without a lot of work going through support. So that's why it's best to suspend your Google Apps accounts rather than delete them. This will give administrators time to migrate everything off of them or get more owners onto those projects, and it'll just be a lot easier than if they were to just delete that account where everything associated with that account is gone. This is also where you're going to manage your custom domain mappings for your App Engine apps. So once you build and deploy an App Engine app, you're going to get a URL that you can access your application in the form of projectid.appspot.com. If you want to wire up your own custom domain, then you'll need to do that through Google Apps. You can get with your administrator. It's a very simple process, and we actually cover that in our App Engine Qualified Developer course, which is our 300 course here at CBT Nuggets. So check that out if you want to see the whole process. We walk through it all from start to finish. In the CBT Nugget, we saw how to get started with projects. We covered the basics of projects as well as many other topics such as project permissions, Cloud IAM, service accounts, got some project best practices, and a little bit about how Google Apps integrates here with Google Cloud Platform. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.